The being known as the Watcher had lived for a very long time. It had seen empires rise from dust and fall back into it. It had watched stars die and species forget their own names. But in all its thousands of years of silent observation, it had never seen anything quite like the humans. They were young. They were small. They dreamed too loudly and refused to stay quiet. And the galaxy, for reasons the Watcher understood very well, was terrified of them. Ambassador Jonah Fell stood in the center of the Grand Helix and looked up at 43 alien species staring down at him. The chamber was enormous. It was built inside a space station that orbited a dying red star, and the curved walls rose so high above him that the seats at the top disappeared into shadow. Every seat was filled. Every eye, every lens, every sensor cluster was pointed at him. He was the only human in the room. He had been the only human in this room for 27 years. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. The kind of tired that settled into the bones after decades of asking for something and being told no in 43 different languages. Counselor Vathos Wren sat at the highest seat. He was Rythani. Tall, thin, with silver skin that shifted like liquid metal, and 4 eyes that never blinked. He was over 900 years old, and he had spent the last 3 centuries making sure that humanity never grew beyond its little corner of space. He looked down at Jonah the way someone might look at an insect on their dining table. "Ambassador Fell," Vathos said, and his voice carried through the chamber like cold wind. "The Council has reviewed the evidence. Your species has violated the Accord of Silence on 14 counts. You have built weapons. You have expanded beyond your permitted borders. You have spread your ideas to lesser species and corrupted their development. How do you answer these charges?" Jonah took a slow breath. He had read the charges. Every single one was a lie, and every single person in this room knew it. The weapons were farming tools for asteroid colonies. The expansion was a medical ship that had drifted 2 light-years past an imaginary line. The cultural contamination was 3 alien species who had started reading human books and decided they liked the ideas inside them. "Counselor Wren," Jonah said, keeping his voice steady, "these charges are built on nothing. We have followed every rule you have placed on us. Every embargo, every restriction, every humiliation. For 300 years, we have done everything you asked. We came to this council in good faith. We asked for nothing more than the right to live as equals." A sound moved through the chamber. It was not quite laughter. It was the sound of 43 species who had already made up their minds. Vathos raised one long hand, and the chamber went silent. "The Council has voted," he said. "The resolution of extinction has been passed. Unanimously." Jonah felt the words hit him, but he did not fall. He had expected this. He had known for years that this day was coming. The Council did not want peace with humanity. They had never wanted peace. They wanted humanity gone. Vathos continued reading. Earth would be reclaimed. All human colonies would be purged and redistributed. The human species would be relocated to managed biological preserves, where they could live out their remaining generations under careful supervision. It was not a war declaration. It was a death sentence dressed in polite language. Jonah listened to every word. When it was done, he looked up at Vathos and said nothing. There was nothing left to say. 27 years of begging, and this was how it ended. He turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the enormous chamber. No one spoke. No one moved. He was almost at the door when he heard Vathos call out behind him. "Ambassador Fell." Jonah stopped, but did not turn around. "Your kind should have stayed in your caves," Vathos said. Jonah stood still for a long moment. Then he walked out of the chamber and did not look back. He moved through the corridors of the Grand Helix, with the calm of a man who had already grieved. He reached his small office, the tiny room that the council had given humanity as a joke, barely large enough for a desk and a chair. He sat down. He opened his communication terminal, and he typed a message that had been waiting to be sent for 300 years. It was not a plea for help. It was not a warning. It was 3 words, encoded in a cipher that only one person on Earth would recognize. The sky is falling. He sent it. Then he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. His part was done. Whatever happened next was no longer in his hands. The message traveled fast. It crossed star systems in seconds, bouncing through hidden relay stations that the Council did not know existed. It passed through the containment blockade around Sol without being detected. It entered Earth's atmosphere and dove deep underground into a mountain that had no name on any map. Inside the mountain, a console that had been dark for decades suddenly lit up. A soft chime filled the room. 3 words appeared on the screen. Admiral Salith Marin was sitting at her desk when the chime sounded. She was 61 years old, with short gray hair and eyes that looked like they had been carved from stone. She had a reputation among the few people who knew she existed. They called her the Widow, not because she had lost a husband, but because everything she touched eventually died. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for a war that everyone told her would never come. She stood up and walked to the console. She read the 3 words. She read them again. For a long moment, she did not move. The room was silent. Her officers stood behind her, waiting, barely breathing. Then something happened that none of them had ever seen before. Admiral Salith Marin smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had been holding her breath for 40 years and had finally been told she could exhale. She turned to face her officers. There were 12 of them, the best military minds humanity had ever produced. They had trained in secret. They had built in secret. They had waited in secret. And now, the waiting was over. At last, she said. 2 words, spoken quietly, but every person in that room felt them like thunder. She straightened her uniform, looked at the map of the galaxy on the far wall, and said, "Begin Protocol Prometheus. Wake everything up." And deep beneath the surface of a dozen moons, inside hollowed-out asteroids, behind the walls of space stations that the Council thought were abandoned, lights began to turn on. Engines began to hum. Weapon systems that had never been fired began their startup sequences. 12,000 warships, hidden across the Sol system for generations, opened their eyes for the first time. The galaxy believed. It knew what humanity was. A young species. A weak species. A species trapped behind a blockade with no fleet, no weapons, and no hope. For 300 years, the Council had watched its embargo slowly crush the humans, and every report confirmed the same thing. Earth was dying. Its colonies were starving. Its people were broken. Every single report was wrong. Admiral Salith Marin stood in the command center, buried deep inside Mount Soren, and watched the walls come alive. Screens that had been dark for decades flickered on one after another. Star maps appeared, fleet positions updated, communication channels opened across the entire Sol system. And for the first time in 300 years, every hidden piece of humanity's military machine was talking to every other piece. Protocol Prometheus was not just a mobilization order. It was the removal of a mask that humanity had been wearing since the day the Council first placed its boot on their neck. "Show me everything," Marin said. Her second-in-command, General Anika Torres, pulled up the full display. What appeared on the screen made even the officers who had helped build it go quiet. 12,000 warships. Not the old, slow cargo ships the Council spies had occasionally spotted limping between Earth and Mars. These were warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They had been designed in secret, built in secret, and tested in secret, deep in the places the Council never thought to look. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The Council considered it worthless rubble. Inside that rubble, humanity had built 17 shipyards. Europa, the ice moon of Jupiter. The Council's scanners showed nothing but frozen water. Beneath that ice, humanity had built weapons laboratories that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Titan, the largest moon of Saturn. The Council had marked it as uninhabitable. It was, in fact, the home of humanity's most advanced research center, where scientists had spent 2 centuries developing technology that broke rules the galaxy did not even know existed. Marin looked at the display and felt the weight of generations pressing on her shoulders. She had not built all of this. No single person had. This was the work of thousands of people across hundreds of years, all of them carrying the same silent promise that one day the cage would open and humanity would show the galaxy what it had become. She thought about her mother. She always thought about her mother at moments like this. Salith Marin had been born on a refugee transport. She was 3 years old when the Council peacefully relocated the human colony on Kepler 442b. Peacefully relocated meant that Council soldiers had arrived with warships, given the colonists 6 hours to leave, and then burned everything they left behind. Her mother, a teacher named Alara Marin, had carried Salith onto a transport ship with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The transport was supposed to take them back to Earth. The journey took 11 months. The Council had approved exactly enough food and water for 8 months. Alara gave her rations to Salith. She told her daughter stories every night about Earth, about oceans and forests, and a sky that was blue instead of black. She made the girl laugh, even as her own body grew thinner and weaker. Alara Marin died 2 weeks before the transport reached Earth. Salith was holding her hand when it happened. She was 3 years old, and she did not fully understand what death meant. But she understood that her mother's hand had gone cold, and that no one was going to tell her stories anymore. At 14, Salith had walked into a military recruitment office that did not officially exist, and told the officer at the desk that she wanted to fight. The officer had looked at this thin, serious girl with hard eyes and asked her why. "Because I want to be ready," she had said, "for the day they come back." Now she was 61. She had spent 47 years preparing. She had risen through the ranks of a military that the galaxy did not know existed. She had overseen the construction of weapons that bent gravity and ships that could fold space. She had trained officers, designed battle plans, and run simulations of a war that everyone told her would never happen. And now it was happening. "Captain Seo," she said into the communication channel. "Report." The voice that came back was calm and steady. Captain Daejung So was aboard the stealth carrier Blackthorn, the most advanced warship humanity had ever built. It did not appear on any scanner. It did not reflect any light. As far as the rest of the galaxy was concerned, it did not exist. "Blackthorn is in position, Admiral. All 11 teams are in position, awaiting your order." Marin nodded. The first move would not be an attack. It would be a message. The Council maintained a network of listening stations across the border systems, 11 stations that monitored everything going in and out of human space. They were the Council's eyes and ears. Without them, the Council's fleet would be flying blind. "Execute Shadowfall," Marin said. Across 11 star systems, separated by hundreds of light years, 11 human strike teams moved at exactly the same moment. They did not destroy the stations. That would have been crude. Instead, they slipped inside the station's own systems and shut them down from within. Every sensor, every transmitter, every backup, gone. Not in minutes, not in seconds. In the span of 4.7 seconds, the Council lost every single eye it had pointed at humanity. It was, by any standard, impossible. No species in the history of the galaxy had ever demonstrated that level of coordination across that much space. The Council's own military experts would later say that even in theory, it should not have been achievable. But they had spent 300 years telling humanity what was impossible. Humanity had stopped listening a long time ago. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Counselor Vythos Ren stood on the bridge of his flagship and addressed the largest military fleet ever assembled. 200,000 warships from 30 species, stretching across space in a formation so vast it blotted out the stars behind it. Today, Vathos said, his silver skin glowing under the bridge lights, we end the human question forever. They are contained, they are starving, they have no fleet, they have no weapons. This will not be a war. This will be a correction. We will arrive, we will dismantle their pathetic defenses, and we will put them where they belong, in cages, where animals are kept. The fleet cheered, thousands of voices from dozens of species, all of them certain that they were marching toward an easy victory. The Watcher, observing from a distance that no scanner could reach, made a quiet note in its records. It had seen this before. The confident march, the proud speeches, the absolute certainty that the enemy was already beaten. It had also seen what usually happened next. They sent an army to kill a world, the Watcher wrote. They did not know they were walking into the mouth of something that had been hungry for a very long time. Deep inside Mount Soren, Admiral Marin watched the Council fleet begin its advance on her long-range scanners. She studied their formation. She counted their ships. She noted their speed and heading. Then she sat down, folded her hands, and waited. She had been waiting her whole life. She could wait a little longer. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly. A technician aboard the Rathani command ship noticed that the border listening stations had gone silent. He checked his instruments. He ran a diagnostic. He checked again. Then he sent a message up the chain of command. And that message passed through 6 officers before it reached the bridge, where Counselor Vathos Ren was standing with his hands behind his back, watching the stars move past the viewport. Counselor, the communications officer said, we have lost contact with all 11 border stations. Vathos did not turn around. All 11? Yes, Counselor. Simultaneously. 4.7 seconds. No distress signals. No damage reports. They simply stopped. A silence settled on the bridge. Several officers exchanged looks. Vathos stood still for a long moment, then waved one hand dismissively. Sabotage, he said. The humans have been desperate for years. They probably sent a few ships to cause trouble before we arrive. It changes nothing. Continue the advance. The fleet continued forward. 200,000 warships, moving in tight formation, their engines burning bright against the black of space. They crossed the first boundary marker into what the Council had designated as human-controlled space, without resistance. Then the second. Then the third. Some of the officers began to relax. The humans were doing exactly what the Council had predicted. Hiding, cowering, waiting to be conquered. A few of the younger officers joked about how quickly it would be over. Then the fleet hit the veil. There was no warning, no alarm, no explosion. One moment the fleet was together, 200,000 ships moving as one body. The next moment, the stars shifted, the sensors scrambled, and every ship in the fleet found itself alone. Not destroyed, not damaged. Alone. It was something far more clever. Humanity had spent 80 years building it. An enormous energy field stretched across the outer edge of the Sol system, completely invisible to every scanner the galaxy had ever produced. When a ship passed through it, the field did not harm the ship. It simply moved it. A slight bend in space, a gentle push, and suddenly a ship that had been flying beside 10,000 allies found itself in empty space, with no one in range and no way to contact anyone. The Council fleet was broken into dozens of small scattered groups in less than 60 seconds. 200,000 ships became 100 tiny islands of confusion, drifting in the dark. On the bridge of his command ship, Vathos Ren felt real confusion for the first time in centuries. His screens showed nothing. His communications reached no one. His navigation systems insisted he was in the correct position, but the rest of the fleet had simply vanished. "What happened?" he demanded. "Where is the fleet?" No one could answer him. No one had ever seen anything like this. And then the humans came. They came out of the dark like ghosts. Their ships were smaller than the Council's warships, sleek and angular, painted in black that swallowed light. They moved in perfect coordination, dozens of ships acting as one mind, turning and striking and pulling away with a precision that looked less like a military operation and more like a dance. The first group of Council ships, a cluster of 40 Draenith heavy cruisers, was surrounded before they even knew the humans were there. The human ships did not use the weapons the galaxy knew. There were no plasma cannons, no missile barrages, no brute force attacks. Instead, the human ships fired gravitational lensing beams, focused gravity that crushed bulkheads, bent armor plating, and tore engines apart without ever puncturing the hull. The Draenith ships were disabled in 3 minutes. Their crews were alive. Their ships were dead. This was not an accident. This was the plan. Admiral Marin sat in her command center and watched the battle unfold on a tactical display that showed every ship in the system, both human and alien. The Council could not see the battlefield. She could see everything. Group 7 has engaged the Korathi pocket, General Torres reported. 14 enemy ships disabled. No casualties on our side. Group 12 is moving on the Valesi formation. Estimated contact in 40 seconds. Group 3 reports the Ithrani pocket has surrendered. They are requesting instructions. Marin listened to each report with the same calm expression. She issued orders in short, precise sentences. Move Group 9 to intercept the eastern pocket. Pull Group 4 back and let the Shohari retreat. Do not pursue. Let them run. That last order confused some of her officers. They had spent their entire careers training for this moment. They finally had the enemy in front of them, scattered and helpless, and the Admiral was letting them go. But Marin understood something that her younger officers did not. This battle was not about killing. It was about fear. She wanted survivors. She wanted thousands of alien soldiers to fly home and tell their governments what they had seen. She wanted the Council to hear the stories about human ships that appeared from nowhere, weapons that defied physics, and a fleet that moved with one mind across millions of kilometers. She wanted the galaxy to be afraid. Captain Daejung So and the Blackthorn moved through the battlefield like a shadow. The stealth carrier was invisible to every sensor in the Council fleet, and Co used that advantage with the cold precision of a surgeon. He slipped past battle groups, avoided debris fields, and navigated through the chaos without firing a single shot. He had a specific target. Vathos Ren's flagship. The Rithani command ship was one of the largest vessels in the fleet, a massive silver warship that the Rithani had built to project power and inspire fear. It had shields that could withstand a direct hit from a planetary defense cannon. It had weapons that could crack a moon. Co disabled it in 9 seconds. The Blackthorn appeared beside the flagship without warning, fired 3 precise gravitational pulses at the ship's engine core, shield generators, and weapons array, and then stopped. The flagship went dark. Every system failed at once. Emergency lights flickered on, casting the bridge in dim red. Vathos stood in that red light, surrounded by silent officers, and felt something he had not felt in 900 years. Fear. Real, deep, animal fear. Then his communication console lit up. A single incoming message from the ship that had just crippled him. Captain Seo's voice was calm, almost polite. Admiral Marin sends her regards, Counselor. She wants you to watch what comes next. The message ended. The Blackthorn vanished back into the dark. The Battle of the Threshold lasted 9 hours. When it was over, the Council fleet had lost over 60,000 ships, not destroyed, but disabled, crippled, left drifting. Humanity had not lost a single vessel, not one. The survivors limped home in damaged ships and crowded escape pods. They carried with them stories that would spread across the galaxy like fire. Stories about a species that should have been broken. A species that should have been starving and desperate and beaten. A species that had instead become something the galaxy had never seen before. Vathos Ren retreated to Council space in a borrowed ship, his flagship still drifting dead somewhere in the Sol system. He called for an emergency session of the Council. His hands were shaking as he made the call. On Earth, Admiral Marin addressed humanity for the first time. Her face appeared on every screen across the Sol system. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She looked into the camera with those stone-carved eyes and spoke in a voice that was steady and quiet. Today, the Council learned something it should have known a long time ago. We are not what they thought we were. But this is not over. This was their first lesson. They will need several more before they understand. She paused. Stay ready. The broadcast ended. Across the Sol system, 12 billion humans sat in silence for a moment. Then, slowly, they began to cheer. The Watcher made its entry that evening, short, simple, final. In 10,000 years of recorded galactic war, no young species had ever broken a Council fleet. The humans did it in 9 hours. I am beginning to think that containing them was not the Council's greatest mistake. Their greatest mistake was giving them 300 years to prepare. Fear travels faster than light. No scientist had ever proven this. But after the Battle of the Threshold, the galaxy provided all the evidence anyone would ever need. The survivors arrived home in waves. Broken ships limped into orbital docks. Escape pods were picked up by patrol vessels. Wounded soldiers were carried into medical stations on stretchers. And every single one of them told the same story in different words. We never saw them coming. We could not stop them. And they let us live because they wanted us to tell you what they did. Within days, the entire galaxy knew. The Council's great fleet, the largest armada ever assembled, had been torn apart in 9 hours by a species that was supposed to be starving behind a blockade. The news hit every world like a shockwave. Governments panicked. Military leaders demanded answers. Ordinary citizens on 100 different planets looked up at their skies and wondered for the first time if the humans might be coming for them next. On the Grand Helix, Counselor Vathos Ren tried to hold things together. He called emergency sessions. He made speeches about resolve and unity. He reminded the Council that their combined militaries still outnumbered the human fleet by more than 10 to 1. He spoke with the confidence of a leader who had been in power for centuries, but anyone who looked closely could see that his hands never stopped moving, and his 4 eyes darted to the door every time it opened. The Council was fracturing. The first cracks appeared within hours of the survivors' return. The Valesi, a species of aquatic diplomats who had always been uncomfortable with the war, formally withdrew their fleet and declared neutrality. The Karathi, whose ships had been among the first disabled at the Threshold, recalled their ambassador and refused to take further calls from the Council. The 3 minor species who had been accused of cultural contamination, the ones who had started reading human books, sent a joint message to Earth, expressing solidarity. They did it on an open channel so the entire galaxy could hear. Vathos watched his coalition crumble and felt the ground shifting beneath him. He had spent 300 years building this. He had designed the containment policy himself. He had convinced 42 other species that humans were dangerous animals who needed to be caged for the good of everyone. And now, because he had pushed too hard and too far, he had given the humans exactly what they needed, a reason to show the galaxy what they really were. But Vathos was old, and old creatures do not surrender easily. He went to the remaining loyalist species, the Rhythani, the Draenith, the Shohari, and a handful of others, and he pushed for a second attack. A bigger fleet, heavier weapons, no mercy this time. They caught us off guard, he told them. It will not happen again. He almost believed it himself. Then Admiral Marin made her next move, and believing became impossible. It happened on what the galaxy would later call the Day of Shadows. 6 human battle groups, each consisting of exactly 100 warships, appeared in orbit above 6 different Council homeworlds at exactly the same moment. 6 planets, 600 ships, separated by thousands of light years, arriving at precisely the same second. The Rhythani homeworld, the Draenith homeworld, the Shohari homeworld, the Pelkari homeworld, the Vanathi homeworld, the Exuri homeworld. 6 of the most powerful species in the Council, the ones who had voted loudest for humanity's extinction, woke up to find human warships hanging in their skies like dark stars. The ships did not fire. They did not move. They simply waited. And then a message began to play. On every frequency, in every language, broadcast to every communication device on every one of those 6 worlds, Admiral Marin's voice spoke. For 300 years you starved our children, burned our colonies, and told us to be grateful. We could end you today. We are choosing not to. This is the difference between us. You declared extinction. We are offering terms. You have 72 hours. The message played once. Then the human ships went silent and still. They did nothing. They just floated there. A reminder, a warning, and a question, all at the same time. 6 homeworlds, filled with terrified citizens who had never seen an enemy ship in their sky. Military commanders screamed for orders. Politicians pointed fingers. 3 governments nearly collapsed within the first 12 hours. On the Grand Helix, the council session devolved into chaos. Species that had been allies for thousands of years turned on each other. The Pelkari blamed the Rhythani for starting the war. The Vanathi blamed the Draenith for not stopping the humans at the threshold. The Exuri said nothing at all. Their ambassador simply packed his things and left. Vathos tried to restore order. He stood at his podium and shouted for unity, but his voice was drowned out by 42 species who were, for the first time, more afraid of the humans than they were of each other. And then, in the middle of the chaos, a door opened. A human walked in. Ambassador Jonah Fell had spent the last several weeks traveling through neutral space on a small civilian ship. He had visited independent stations and non-aligned worlds. He had talked to journalists, diplomats, and ordinary citizens. He had told them the truth about the containment policy, the starvation, the forced relocations, the 3 centuries of quiet cruelty. And now he was back. He walked to the center of the chamber and stood in the same spot where the council had sentenced his species to extinction. He looked up at the tiers of seats, many of them now empty, and he spoke. I come with humanity's terms, he said. Full sovereignty for the human species, an end to all embargoes and restrictions, reparations for 3 centuries of oppression, and a permanent seat on this council. These terms are non-negotiable. You have 60 hours remaining. Vathos stared down at Jonah with naked hatred. You are one man, one species. You are nothing. Jonah looked at him and said quietly, There are 600 of our warships sitting above your homeworld right now, Counselor. I would choose my next words very carefully. Vathos said nothing. The chamber was silent. Jonah turned and walked out. For the next 48 hours, the council argued. The moderate species pushed for acceptance. They had seen enough. They had lost enough. The humans were offering peace, and peace was better than whatever would come next. But Vathos would not accept it. He could not. To accept humanity's terms would mean admitting that everything he had done for 300 years was wrong. It would mean admitting that he had not contained a dangerous animal. He had tortured an innocent species, and created the very monster he had always feared. So instead of accepting, he chose the only option left. The one that the Council had kept hidden for 10,000 years. Deep in the archives of the Grand Helix, behind doors that required the authorization of 3 senior counselors, there was a weapon called the Silence. It had been built by a species that no longer existed, long before the current council had formed. It was enormous, a station the size of a small moon, hidden in the void between galaxies. And its purpose was simple. It could kill a star, point it at a solar system, fire it once, and the star at the center would collapse. Every planet in the system would die. Every living thing would be erased. It had never been used. It was meant as a final option, a weapon so terrible that its existence alone was supposed to prevent the need for it. Vathos did not care about prevention anymore. He wanted extinction. He forged the authorization codes. He activated the Silence. He aimed it at Saul. The alert reached Admiral Marin 12 minutes later. She was in her command center, reviewing the diplomatic progress, allowing herself the smallest hope that this might end without more bloodshed. Then the screen changed. A new signal, a massive energy signature powering up in deep space, pointed directly at Earth's sun. Her officers went pale. General Torres swore under her breath, the room filled with the kind of silence that comes right before the worst moment of your life. Marin stared at the screen for 10 seconds. Then she closed her eyes, took one long, slow breath, and opened them again. "So they have chosen the hard way," she said. Her voice did not shake. Her hands did not tremble. "Good." She turned to her officers. "Activate Protocol Last Light. Get me Captain So." Somewhere in the dark between galaxies, the Silence hummed to life. A weapon that could kill a star, aimed at the heart of humanity's home. And 12 billion people had no idea it was there. But Admiral Marin knew. She had known for a very long time. The Silence was a monster built by dead hands. It floated in the emptiness between galaxies, far from any star or planet, a station the size of a small moon wrapped in metal so dark it swallowed every photon that touched it. For 10,000 years it had drifted there, sleeping, waiting for someone desperate enough or hateful enough to wake it up. Vathos Ren had done both. On the Grand Helix, Vathos stood at a private console in his chambers, watching the Silence power up through a secure feed. The weapon's core was spinning faster now, pulling energy from the void itself, building toward a single shot that would collapse Earth's sun and turn the Sol system into a frozen graveyard. He felt no guilt. He felt no doubt. In his mind, he was saving the galaxy. The humans were a disease, and this was the cure. He entered the final firing sequence and set the countdown. In 90 minutes, humanity's star would die, and everything they had built, their hidden fleet, their impossible technology, their stubborn, infuriating refusal to be broken, would die with it. 6,000 light-years away, Admiral Marin stood in her command center and looked at the same countdown on her own screen. Around her, officers moved with controlled urgency, their faces tight with focus. This was the moment they had trained for. Not the battle, not the diplomacy. This. "How long have we known?" General Torres asked quietly, standing beside her. 114 years, Marin said. Torres stared at her. 114 years. We have known about a weapon that can kill our sun for 114 years, and you never told anyone outside this room. There was no reason to cause panic, Marin said. There was only a reason to prepare. She pulled up a file on the main screen. It was labeled Protocol Last Light, and it was the oldest active file in the Terran military database. It had been started by an intelligence officer named Rhea Osei, who had discovered the silence during a deep cover mission in Council space over a century ago. Osei had spent 11 years mapping the weapon, studying its systems, and identifying its weaknesses. She had died on that mission, but her work had lived on. After her, others had taken up the task. A chain of covert agents spanning 4 generations, each one building on the work of the last, each one embedding themselves deeper into the systems that controlled the silence. They had not been able to destroy it. The weapon was too large and too well protected for that. But they had done something almost as good. They had planted themselves inside it, like seeds in a wall, tiny cracks that looked like nothing until the moment someone tried to fire it. "Seo," Marin said into the communication channel. "You are clear to proceed." Captain Dae-Jung So was already inside the silence. He and a strike team of 40 soldiers had boarded the station 6 hours ago through a maintenance hatch that a human agent had unlocked 3 decades earlier and kept unlocked ever since. They had moved through the dark corridors in silence, following a map that had been drawn and redrawn by 4 generations of spies. The station was enormous and mostly automated. Its corridors stretched for hundreds of kilometers, vast and empty, filled with the hum of ancient machinery that had not been properly maintained in millennia. So's team moved fast, splitting into 3 groups, each heading for one of the weapon's 3 primary power cores. It should have been simple. It was not. Vathos, paranoid and desperate, had sent a garrison to the silence, a company of Rythani soldiers who had arrived just hours before So's team. They were spread throughout the station, guarding key positions, and they were not the kind of soldiers who asked questions before shooting. The first contact happened in a narrow corridor near the central core. Seo's point team came around a corner and found themselves face to face with 8 Rythani guards. There was 1 second of silence, and then everything happened at once. The fight was brutal and fast. Human soldiers fought with a ferocity that the Rythani had never seen up close. These were not the starving refugees the Council's propaganda had described. These were warriors who had trained every day of their lives for exactly this kind of moment. They fought with weapons the Rythani did not recognize, and tactics that seemed to predict every move before it was made. Seo lost 3 soldiers in that first exchange. He did not have time to grieve. He pressed forward. The next 50 minutes were the longest of his life. His teams fought through corridor after corridor, clearing Rythani resistance in short, violent bursts, while the countdown timer on the silence ticked steadily towards 0. Seo ran through the dark, with his weapon in his hands and the weight of 12 billion lives on his back, and he did not slow down. He could not. At the 40-minute mark, the first power core was disabled. A shaped charge, placed by a human agent 20 years ago, detonated on remote command, and 1/3 of the silence's power grid went dark. At the 22-minute mark, the second core was shut down. Seo's second team reached it and physically cut the power conduits with plasma torches, working so fast that their gloves melted to their hands. That left the third core, the main core, the one that Vathos was using to control the firing sequence remotely from the Grand Helix. Seo reached it with 11 minutes on the clock, and found it defended by 30 Rythani soldiers, dug into fortified positions around the core chamber. He had 12 soldiers left. He did not hesitate. He did not calculate the odds. He looked at his team, and they looked at him, and nothing needed to be said. They had all volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not come back. Every one of them had a reason. A family on Earth. A memory of something the Council had taken. A promise to someone who was counting on them. They went in. The fight lasted 8 minutes. It was the most violent 8 minutes in the history of human warfare. When it was over, 9 of Sio's soldiers were dead. Every Rithani defender was down. And Sio, bleeding from a wound in his side, dragged himself to the core control panel with 2 minutes left on the clock. He entered the shutdown code that had been passed down through 4 generations of agents. The core sputtered. The hum that had filled the station began to fade. The countdown stopped at 1 minute and 11 seconds. The silence died. Its last surge of energy rippled outward in a harmless wave that dissipated into the void like a breath into cold air. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the live feed in stunned silence. The weapon was dead. Earth's sun still burned. Humanity was still alive. On the Grand Helix, Vathos Ren stared at his console and watched the word offline appear where the firing sequence had been. He stood there for a long time, not moving, not speaking. Then the door to his chambers opened, and 12 council members walked in. They did not come to talk. They came to arrest him. The vote to accept humanity's terms passed 39-3. The 3 dissenters were detained. 2 days later, a human warship docked at the Grand Helix for the first time in history. Admiral Salith Marin walked out of the airlock and stepped onto the station where Jonah Fell had begged for 27 years. She wore her uniform. She walked alone. And she did not beg. The council chamber was full again, but the atmosphere was different now. There was no contempt in the air. There was no superiority. There was only the quiet, uncomfortable silence of 43 species looking at a single human woman and realizing that they had never understood what they were dealing with. Marin walked to the center of the chamber. She looked up at the tiers of seats. She saw fear in some faces, shame in others, and something that might have been respect in a few. She spoke without notes, without a prepared speech, without raising her voice. You tried to cage us, so we learned to build in the dark. You tried to starve us, so we learned to thrive on nothing. You tried to erase us, so we made ourselves unforgettable. We are not your enemy. We never were. But we will never ever be your victims again. She let the words settle. Then she continued. We are not here for revenge. We are here for a seat at this table, and the right to exist without asking permission. Grant us that, and you will find no better ally in this galaxy. Deny us, and you already know what happens next. The Council granted everything. Full sovereignty, end of all embargoes, reparations, a permanent seat. It was done in less than an hour. Afterward, when the chamber had emptied and the diplomats had scattered to send messages to their homeworlds, Marin stood alone on the observation deck. The dying red star that the Grand Helix orbited filled the viewport with dull crimson light. She stood there, with her hands at her sides, and stared out at the galaxy that had tried to destroy her species. Footsteps behind her. She did not turn around. She knew who it was. Jonah Fell stood beside her. He looked older than he had 2 months ago, older and lighter, as if a weight he had been carrying for decades had finally been set down. Is it over? He asked. Marin was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. Not the cold, sharp smile she had given in the command center. A real one, small and tired and genuine. The kind of smile that only comes after a very long journey. No, she said, it is just beginning. They stood together in the red light and looked out at the stars. Somewhere behind them, a new chapter of galactic history was being written. Somewhere ahead of them, a future that no one had thought possible was waiting to be built. And far away, in a place no scanner could reach, the Watcher made its final entry. I have watched 14 species rise and 14 species fall. I have seen empires that spanned 1,000 worlds crumble into dust. But I have never seen what I saw today. A species that was beaten, starved, caged, and sentenced to death, and instead of breaking, it became something the galaxy has never seen before. The council tried to destroy them. It only taught them how to burn. I do not know what the humans will do with the galaxy now that it is open to them. But I know this. I am glad I was here to see it. I am glad I was watching. Because in 10,000 years, this is the first time I have ever been surprised. The entry ended. The Watcher closed its records. And somewhere in the Sol system, 12 billion humans looked up at their sun, still burning, still warm, still alive, and began to build the future they had always been promised.